A very good evening, Zimbabwe. You are listening to Studio 7 from the Voice of America on Monday, June 15th, 2015. And this is Live Talk. I'm Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Kip Stube.
And tonight on Live Talk, we are going to talk about the African Union Summit currently underway in Johannesburg, South Africa.
To join the discussion, phone us directly at this number 001-202-619-2077 and we'll call you back.
And as usual, Live Talk goes out to Zimbabwe on our 909 medium wave frequency and on the 4930, 5940 and 15460 kilohertz shortwave Monday through Friday at 8:30 p.m.
On the internet, you can find us at www.voazimbabwe.com, www.voashona.com, and www.voindevele.com.
We put a yoke around our necks. We said each leaders must have only 2 terms. In Europe, they haven't said that. In America, because they are vast, it's a vast country. Yes, that's where they have 2 terms. But in Europe, no, it's democracy. If the people still want a leader, let the leader continue.
It's a very funny issue that the chairperson of the African Union was implying that it is not good for African countries to restrict their the leadership terms for their presidents or heads of state and government to 2 terms, because in Europe, as he said, they don't do that. But you see, we are trying to entrench our own democracy in Africa, and the issue of the 3rd term or the contestation beyond 2 terms is what is causing conflict in Burundi.
Ngizakhuluma njengom-Afrika kodwa yebo kambe u-Al-Bashir njengawo wonke nje ama-president ase-Afrika kukhona akwenzile kubantu bakhe ukubahlukumeza. Njalo i-South Africa ingelinye lamazwe elasayinda ine-signature kulesivumelwano se-ICC. Mashoka akadaro mashoka akaipa chose nekuti anodzosera nyika kumasure, noti nyika kurera Zimbabwe but Africa kumasure, nenhau yekuti iyo nyaya yevanhu vanogarisa pazvigaro vari vatungamiriri venyika ndo nyaya dzimwe dziri kukonzera kupokana, ndo nyaya dzimwe dziri kukonzera mvonga mupopoto muAfrica macho imomo.
Once again, thanks for joining us, and you are listening to Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about the African Union Summit currently underway in central Johannesburg, South Africa.
African leaders attending the 25th AU Summit are expected to conclude their talks this evening, but Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has stolen the show with a showdown between the South African High Court and the Sudanese strongman. The South African court had ruled that Omar al-Bashir be arrested pending a formal request from the ICC. Al-Bashir is wanted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court.
But Advocate William Mokari for the government later confirmed that the state had reliable information that the Sudanese president had already left the country. The theme of this summit, of course, is the year of women empowerment and development towards Africa's 2063 agenda.
What do you think about these issues at the African Summit? If you wish to join the show right now, phone us directly at this number, 001-202-619-2077, and we'll call you back. That number again, 001-202-619-2077. Ye, kunjalo kumfowethu.
Onguka hamadzadiwa toda kuti tinge tichitarisa nezviri kubuda kumusangano ye-African Union kana kuti musangano we-African Union uri kuitirwa iwo ku Johannesburg, South Africa uko. Uye mashoko atichangotamira anoti vatungamiri venyika vachiri kuenderera mberi vachiita hurukuro dzavo vari muchiwande kana kuti atingati ma-closed door session. Pari kutarisirwa kuti panopera musangano iyoyi mutungamiri wenyika vaRobert Mugabe vanova sachigaro we-African Union na amai Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma vanovaiwo sachigaro we-African Commission vachataura nevatori venhau kuti zvinenge zvafamba sei, asi kune nyaya dzakawanda-wanda dziri kukurukurwa ikoko, kusanganisira yava Omar al-Bashir vekusudan vanga vanzivo nedare reHigh Court ngavambomira vari munyika imomo, nekuti pana vamwe vanga vakwira dare vachiti al-Bashir vanofanira kusungwa nekuti vari kutsvagwa nedare reInternational Criminal Court nenyaya dzekutyora kodzero dzevanhu muDarfur region kana kuti mudunhu reDarfur iko kunyika yavo yeSudan. Uye pane nyayawo dzakataurwa nezvadzo, kusanganisa nyaya yekuti vatungamiri vemuAfrica voramba vachitonga here kusvika madhonga amira nyanga, asi vamwe vanga vachiti aiwa ngavatonge kwemakotoro maviri kana kuti matemu maviri vosiya kouyawo vamwe, asi vaMugabe vakati iyo nyaya yavanyatsowirirane nayo nekuti inoita sekuti vekunze vada kuudza vanhu vekuAfrica kuti munotonga sei, vachiti kune dzimwe nyika dzekumawirira uko dzekuti vanhu vanoramba vachitonga pasina anovabvunza, vachitaurawo kuti iyo African Union inofanira kuramba iri sangano rakazvimirira, nekuti iko zvino African Union inobatsirwa nemari dzakawanda kubva kuAmerica, kuChina nenyika dzemu-EU. Gibbs
yewombe zulukandaba lingalithola njani lapha likhona sethemba ukuthi likholisile ngempela veki khona ngale ke South Africa sizwile ukuthi kunenga okwenzakalayo kule African Union Summit ekhona ngale ke njengoba Blessing esitsho umhlangano lo umhlangano omkhulu kakhulu lo nyaka ke ukhangelane labesifazana, so singathi ke ngesihloko sankhona kuthiwa Year of Women Empowerment and Development Towards Africa's Agenda 2063. Khonapho ke siyabona ukuthi kukhangelelwe ukuthi kuthuthukiswe okwabomama. Sikhuluma nje kathesi bekukhona khona ngale ke okade kuhlafunwa sibili okuhambelana lokuthi kati abantu beAfrica ngaba abuswa njani. Sizwile ke umongameli uRobert Mugabe sithi ngokuya kwezinto ngabantu bayekelwa inkokheli zeAfrica ziyekelwe zenze zikufunayo nxa ukuthi abantu basazifuna zihlale esikhundleni kuze ukuthi asazi ukuthi ungathini khonapho. Kuzobuya ke lo daba okade lusekudwini olukamnumzana Omar al-Bashir, yena ngumongameli wakhona ngale eSudan. Ubekhangelelwe ukuthi adonselwe ke entilongweni khona ngale South Africa kulandela isinqumo esenziwe yiHigh Court yakhona ngale eSouth Africa ethe kumele ukuthi angaphumeli izweni. Kodwa ke ngokuzwa kwethu njengoba basekhula besitsho ngani sechaye phansi. Echaya phansi nje khonapho kusele kusuka lezi nqumo ezithize ezenziwe khona ngale ke iHigh Court yankhona njalo. Sifuna ukuzwa ngani izulu kanti ukuthi kambe lithini ngokwenzakala khona ngale eGoli. Ukuze lisichume kathesi chani inombolo nansi 1-202-619-2077. Kunjalo mfowethu.
Gibbs, and I think we have our first two guests lined up. First, we have Advocate Gabriel Shumba, who also happens to be the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Exiles Forum. Advocate Shumba, good evening.
Good evening to your listeners.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we are also joined by, of course, Mr. David Ndlovu, who is a ZANU-PF Central Committee member. Mr. Ndlovu, good evening.
Evening to you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Gibbs, you can start the ball rolling.
Let's start with you, Mr. Ndlovu. We know that the African Union is holding this kind of summit in South Africa. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of talk, maybe too much talk about, leaders in Africa overstaying in office. And the president of Zimbabwe, Mr. Mugabe, says there's nothing wrong with that. So how do you weigh in there? What do you think about that kind of, talk?
Now, in fact, I'll talk about Africa. I'll talk about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, we have our constitution. Our latest constitution says the president should be in power for 2 terms. Once elected, he serves his first term, then his second term, that's it. So that cuts the service of president. So we can't talk about the continuation, because that continuation will be inconsistent with the constitution of Zimbabwe. With regards to other countries, I will not comment because I don't know anything about their constitutions. So each and every country has its own constitution, which indicates how long a president must stay. What the president was saying is that it should not be detected by other nations like the West, who say you should come up with those constitutions because they are not
there to instruct how Africa should be ruled. It is Africa and Africans themselves, like we did in Zimbabwe, who decide how long their leader must stay as their president.
Yeah, kunjalo ke wothi uzama ukukhuluma lo Gabriel sizothini.
Advocate Shumba, I want you to respond to that, but of course, let's talk just briefly about this al-Bashir incident. We understand he has performed a Houdini act. What's happening in South Africa? Is he still there? Has he left?
Well, it has been confirmed in court this morning that the president of Sudan skipped the country in the early hours of the morning. In fact, one would really not be far off the mark to say that he was aided and abetted in that by the negligence of the South African authorities, which failed to adhere to an interim High Court order which was issued yesterday. In particular, the Home Affairs Department was specifically instructed to ensure that all ports of entries are sealed against Bashir so that he will not leave the Republic. This interim order was based upon the fact that there are allegations and an arrest warrant which was issued in 2009 and another one in 2010, respectively, for crimes against humanity committed against majority black people in the Darfur region. There was genocide that was committed against those people in the Darfur region. So the High Court in South Africa is one institution that has clearly shown that it stands by the people of Africa. It seeks to protect them. It seeks to advance their justice in collaboration with the International Criminal Court. But one thing we must be very clear about, is the fact that this ruling was also made premised upon South Africa's own adoption and domestication of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in 2002. So in essence, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court has become part and parcel of South African law. So all those who claim that the ICC is serving other purposes, blah, 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 all that hot air about the ICC role in Africa. It's not relevant because South Africa initiated and integrated aspects of the Rome Statute in its own laws.
Thank you, Advocate Shumba, though we seem to be having problems with that line. Of course, for those of you who are just joining us, this is Studio 7 Live Talk, and we are talking about the African Union Summit currently underway in Johannesburg, South Africa. Of course, President Robert Mugabe, who is the African Union chairperson and the chairperson of the AU Commission, Madame Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, expected to brief the media in what is expected to be the closing remarks, but the leaders are still in closed-door sessions as we speak. Gibbs.
Yes, khuluma kanje ke zulu kandaba kukhanya ngazana umhlangano lo lokuqhubekela phambili njalo kucatsha ngalokuthi uphela umhlangano lo umnumzana uRobert Mugabe kanye lonkosazana Zuma baza kukhuluma ke le ntatheli izindaba bathi ukuthi izinqumo eziphume emhlanganweni lezi lowo kungabe kuyini. Ye sibuye kuwe baba Ndlovu lokhu khona ecingweni ukhona Ndlovu sike sizwe ngazana ucingo kaNdlovu ngani hlupha ke baba Ndlovu khona ecingweni kukhanya ngazana ucingo lakhe luqhumekile qhubeka khona mfowethu
rigaiti mbo verenga zvanyorwa nevanhu. We have several messages on WhatsApp. The first one says, I think Mr. Mugabe is right in his opinion. As you can see, we as Africans, we can choose what we want for ourselves. We are able to set rules and laws for ourselves. Western nations set their own laws, and we Africans never interfere with them. Why are they so much interested in our own affairs? We chose our leaders according to what we want in them, and I don't think anyone from abroad has any say or control in whatever we decide to do. Let the president rule for as long as he wants, or as long as people want. The people are the ones who voted for him, and therefore they must decide when to remove him. As for President Omar al-Bashir, I think all the African heads of states must stand firm in his support. It seems the International Criminal Court was formed as an idea to humiliate African leaders. How many African presidents now have been tried in the ICC? George Bush and Tony Blair, who made allegedly a lot of bloodbaths in Afghanistan and Iraq, were never questioned by the ICC. This is Titus. Then we have Muketiwa anoti Muketiwa Tarugarira anoti matemu maviri akanaka ndokuti utungamiri usazonetsa sezviri kuita vaMugabe vari kurambira pachigaro ndo unonzi umbimbi ndoga iwowo matemu maviri akanakisa. Then we have A. Mutsopotsi from Monde Valley who writes, I think South Africa has done a lot in terms of democracy and human rights, but it's only a country out of a dozen of African countries scattered with dictators scattered all over. And maybe this explains why they've let this dictator from Sudan escape the full wrath of the law. And then Abraham Shiri writes, al-Bashir is a criminal. He must be executed with immediate effect. Robert Mugabe's sentiments clearly indicate that he is not prepared to leave office, and ZANU-PF is there to stay. Under what circumstances? This the only solution to this is to vote him out. This is Abraham Shiri. Of course, also writing there. Gibbs.
Yes, sizwe ngazali ke ubaba uNdlovu sekhona ecingweni. Baba Ndlovu khona ecingweni? Ukhona baba Ndlovu?
Ngikhona.
Oye, ucingo kade singani sokuqhumekile. Singakabuyi kuwe ukuthi sibale kancane lokho esilakho Ndlovini. There's some messages blessing on Facebook. One of those is from Jokonya who writes, you see, South Africa has got a problem, but I support the way they did things. By allowing the Sudanese president to leave. It is good because some people like Ian Smith were not taken to the ICC after killing people in Chimoy. I think that's a statement from Mr. Chokonya there. So mwewe Baba Ndlovu, so ungathi ke nxa usukhangele sesingena sibili sijula ngalokho kwenziwe yi-South African government ukuthi bayekele uBashir esuka khona ngale eSouth Africa esiya elizweni lakhe. Kambe ngabe kuqondile yini njalo bebezambopha yini khona ngale khona?
You see, now, ICC is a problem now. Now, we can with them African countries. International law, yes. Now, it's what we make on international law is that we can with the Amazi, Avantavansi, the Kayla. As if Europe, I went to the Gilama kind of money in Europe. I want to have that, but I will is one. Or go out can be so court. Why is like court a kind of Avantavansi to the pay? You see, the Kataza. Yeah, it's true, but the international law, why leave the beer to the other Union, Japanese, but I'm Africans, the master is this. Which the coming and they are under Nairobi country, over discriminatory against slaves.
Yes, I was a cool Ubambe Ungakachana. So what he's saying is that there are so many atrocities that have been committed in Europe as well. But why are the European leaders not being dragged before the ICC? So he says African leaders should resist this kind of move by the ICC to drag most of them to the courts. So he's not happy at all.
Advocate Shumba, is he on the line?
Yes, I am, blessed.
Do you agree with what Mr. Ndlovu is saying about the ICC?
No, I don't agree with those sentiments. Let me clarify something. The first is that the majority of countries that have signed to the Rome Statute are in Africa. We do that mainly because we want to convince the world that we are at least trying to be democratic when in fact we are not. Two, there is a caller or a writer who says that it's mostly African presidents. How many of them that have been dragged to the ICC? It's only this one who has an arrest warrant before the ICC. If he is speaking of Kenyatta in Kenya, eventually that arrest warrant was withdrawn. But let me clarify also the fact that if he thinks that because Charles Taylor was tried for crimes committed in Liberia and Sierra Leone, he was not tried under the ICC. It was a special court for Sierra Leone, which eventually had to move from Sierra Leone to The Hague. So it's not the ICC. And thirdly, let's understand the fact that most of the cases before the ICC, which emanate from Africa, have been referred by Africans themselves. So it is hypocritical to claim that the ICC is targeting African heads of state, etc. If you look at those who have been sent to the ICC from DRC, it was a referral of the DRC government. If you look at Omar al-Bashir, there was a panel of experts from Africa that recommended to the Security Council of the United Nations that he be referred there. There are several cases, the Lord Resistance Army guys who are being tried in the ICC, they were referred by the Ugandan government. So we can't then pretend that after we sign and ratify the ICC or Rome Statute, that it's the ICC that is targeting us. It is us who are actually bringing these cases to strengthen democracy and also to ensure that the victims on our continent, which is notorious for various violations, including genocide, for conflict, as we have seen in Burundi, so that we get justice for those people. So it is us, we have consciously taken that decision. And the issue of 30 terms, 40 terms, etc., which President Mugabe was talking about, it is again hypocritical, because he in the same breath mentioned that in Burundi we don't want to see a 30 term for the president leader, and that is the African Union position. That is the position that was agreed to in Burundi by Parliament. Same as in Zimbabwe, where our constitution was agreed by the people, that we will have a president who only sits for 2 terms. So nobody from any other part of the world dictated that to us. If you look at South Africa, it's the same thing. If you look at all the other countries, so we are just being hypocritical. And clearly we want to employ the rule of law when it suits us. But when it doesn't, we then want to cry foul.
Thank you, Advocate Shumba. I think we have been joined by our third guest, political analyst, George Mukwananzi. Good evening, Mr. Mukwananzi.
Evening, sir. How are you?
We are doing great. Gibbs.
Baba Mkwananzi siyabona ukuthi khona ngapho kade ngani kulokuxozela phakathi kwababa lo phezu kwababa lo okuthiwa uBashir. Kambe wena ngombono wakho ubona ngani bebengamthela yini entolongweni?
Kube liphutha elikhulu ukuthi ithuba lokuthi le ndoda zikhalele amasongo kaSigonyela isuke yathola intutshana yokuthi iphundluke iphume sizizwa sibuhlungu ngalelo ngoba besifisa ukuthi ngabe ibanjiwe yavalelwa umthetho okade vele umisela ukuthi usetshenziswe kuyo njengoba iyisigelekeqe esinamacala amakhulu okushaya ibhuqe uluntu lwaseDarfur besifisa ukuthi isetshenziswe njengesibonelo esihle kubo bonke abantu asebethe benza umbhuqazwe onjengalo esawubona eZimbabwe esiubone eRwanda esiubone eBurundi esiubone eCongo esiubone kuphi nakuphi bonke laba abantu kudingeka ukuthi kube khona indlela yokuthi bajeziswe ukuze lento ingaqhubeki ibhebhetheka ngoba uma kungekho ukujeziswa laba bakwenza bazoqhubeka bekwenza ngoba kukho kumele bakwesabe yikho ke kulebe liphutha elikhulu kakhulu ukuthi iphunyuke le ndoda.
Baba Ndlovu uyavuma khonapho okunywa uMkwananzi?
I think ngikhulumile ukuthi mina although South Africa is really good to in the international convention, in certain factors. See, the South Africans now, they are now political now. They are now realizing their political blunder. That's why they keep your humble. They cannot continue the things that are into the ASY, my European countries, whereby Bang Police by Africans that want. We have South Africa, that's why in the Internet Convention, the ICC, of course, very unfortunate. But being Africans, we must resist by all means to which colonial masters they continue trying to take it how Africa should be run.
So now, according to Mr. Ndlovu, Mr. Mkwaranzi is saying that Africans must actually resist, that kind of temptation by the West to drag, people behind to the ICC. So I think at the end of the day, it depends on who is on the other side of the island, right?
And that's true. That's true. Of course, just a brief history of the Sudanese strongman Omar al-Bashir. Of course, he was born on the 1st of January 1944. Bashir was admitted into the Sudan Military Academy in 1960 as a pilot. He holds 2 master's degrees in military science from the Sudanese College of Commanders in Malaysia. Bashir is the first sitting president ever to be indicted by the ICC. He was re-elected as president in Sudan for a new 5-year term in April 2010. Of course, he has just been there was an inauguration recently where President Mugabe went. Of course, he loosened the Sudanese economy to take advantage of oil production and establish strong trading ties with China and Russia. And in July 2010, Bashir became a wanted man when the ICC issued a second warrant on the grounds of considered reasonable belief that he was responsible for 3 counts of genocide committed against the Fur, Masalit, and Zangawa ethnic groups in Sudan. Of course, he won another term, right? And he was recently inaugurated. And I've just read, he's the first sitting president to be actually indicted.
Mr. Shumba, now this gentleman is the first African leader to be indicted. But at the end of the day, do we need a definition of African democracy? Just briefly.
No, I don't think you need any definition of democracy. Democracy the world over. It's not unique. It can't be applied to Africa and become different from what is practiced in Asia or in Europe. Otherwise, it ceases to be democracy. Democracy, simply put, is rule by the majority, which respects the rule of law and also respects minorities. So that is how succinctly I can put the definition of democracy. So whether you are in Europe or in Africa, the standards must be the same. That is why the United Nations, for example, in 1948 came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all nations are part of that. Then if you come to Africa, with its African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it mirrors what appears in the UN Universal Declaration for Human Rights and the other convention which follows the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I also wanted to say, as we discuss these things, to apply them practically to people, the simple question before us is whether you want to be on the side of murderers, rapists, and those that commit atrocities against the African people, or on the other hand, you want to be standing with the victims of genocide, crimes against humanity, and other atrocities. So
Advocate Shumba, yes. Please do stay on the line, and also Mr. Ndlovu and Mr. Mkwananzi. We just want to take a short break, but we'll be back with you in a bit. Our caller, Mkoma Andrew, Rambaye Nyu Muriparunari. Of course, for our radio listeners, it ends here, but the good news is we are streaming live. So go to www.voazimbabwe.com and press on Live Talk. This is Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Kibs Dube saying stay tuned.
for those of you who are just joining us, good evening, and this is Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about the African Union Summit currently underway in Johannesburg, South Africa. Of course, the heads of state and government were still locked in closed-door sessions, and we are expecting that at the end of the meetings, President Robert Mugabe, who is the African Union chairperson, and Madame Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who is the African Commission chairperson, will brief the media. And of course, the topical issue, or what is threatened to overshadow this summit, is of course the case of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir.
And our guests tonight are Mr. Gabriel Shumba, who is the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Exodus Forum. We also have got Mr. David Ndlovu in Bulawayo, who is a ZANU-PF Central Committee member. And in Johannesburg, we've got Mr. George Mkwananzi, an independent political commentator. If you wish to join the show right now, phone us directly at this number, 001-202-619-2077, and we'll call you back. That number again, 001-202-619-2077. Yeah, ask Kobe for it.
Advocate Shumba, we'd cut you short if you can continue from where you had left.
So I just wanted to say briefly which statement I have already said. Either you are on the side of monstrous dictatorial leaders and you want to protect them, or you are on the side of victims that are the majority of African people. The choice is clear-cut, it's very simple. And briefly in that respect, I also wanted to say we more than ever need the International Criminal Court for the simple reason that many of our institutions are dysfunctional and we are deliberately killing them. I will give you a simple example of the SADC tribunal that we have as African leaders recently incapacitated. So we need the ICC among other reasons that I have already given.
Thank you so much, Advocate Shumba. Getimbo Tora mtereri wedu mkoma Andrew Makadi. Murisei.
Hai tiripo Makadi.
Aiwa tiripo ndirikunzwa kuti ngoma Andrew vanokhuluma.
Iya ngiyakhuluma impela orishona ngiyayizwa but ngiyakhuluma
mala sihlafuneke isinto blessing bezama lapha bebuza kimi ukuthi usabona uJohn
Shona manje siyaqhamuka lingahleka libulawa Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so ke wothi ke siqoqe ke sizwe ukuthi udaba lolu lubona njani oluka Omar al-Bashir ukuthi usethe phulukuhlu wasuka khona ngale eGoli sebuyele elizweni lakhe.
Mina lapha ngiqala nyalibingelele ehlelweni lonke lisibambele uhlelo ngiyajabula kuba ngingene ehlelweni elangalamhla.
Siyabonga mfowethu.
Kakhulu ebengubona kufanele kube khona kuma African leaders. Okuqala ngizacela ukuthi ngisho ukuthi akulasela elifuna ipolisa eduze isikhathi sonke. Okuqala akulasela elifuna ipolisa eduze isikhathi sonke. Laba abantu bonke ama leaders wonke akhathwe umsebenzi ngabantu. Akumelanga bazithathele bona ukuthi bafuna ukuhlala amathemu amanengi ngenxa ukuthi bathandwa ngabantu. Alright, laba abarobha abantu ngelokuzana ngama election bebarobha ngama election bazahlala 100 years phela bebusa. Lo muntu befanele abotshwe, i-ICC ifanele imbophe. Omunye lomunye onayo kumele athonisiswe abotshwe ukwenzela ukuthi kusasa abazangena ama-leaders amatsha bazi ukuthi ozakona uyabotshwa. Laye ngumuntu kumele abotshwe, kanti litsho ukuthi kumele umuntu laye ebotshwe ezulwini kuphela emhlabeni bemiyekele. Hayi mistake enkulu ama-African leaders laba special esebehlale kakhulu. Ngiyazi ukuthi uChalimani wakhona ubezela ngeke kuvume lokho kuba sehlale kakhulu. Ngiyabonga kodwa ke bensisa ukuthi kungavumakali lokho uma laba abasekhenda ukuthi bahlale isikhathi eside. Hayi balungile kodwa mina ngisekhenda i2 terms it's okay ngoba abantu bayona khangelani kathesi amazwe awonakele abantu sebethethe umthetho kathesi for example iZimbabwe sokunganile omnikazi ayisengeyabantu sebekhohlwe ukuthi bona bangeniswa umsebenzi ukungeniswa phela lokhano kuba ngupresident esikhundleni bachathile abantu mabengasabamfuni bayamkhipha so yikho bengafuni bafuna ukuhlala 100 days nyabonga
hayi sibongele kakhulu khona ngapho lapho khona nomzala Andrew
ngisegoli mina ngoda ngumZimbabwe
awuboni ke ungadina kula kusasa usiqume futhi kusasa
yebo baba ngiyabonga
sibongele kakhulu ye so what Mr. Andrew is saying is that there's no thief that literally entertains a police person. Never, according to him. So he says, so all these African leaders are really scared, you know, about overstaying in power and all those kind of things. And they fear going to the ICC, you know, for certain reasons. So he says each leader should stay at least for about 2 terms. And that's it. And somebody has to go. He says Zimbabwe, for example, is now known as a country that is owned by Mr. Mkani. He's saying, no, this should not be the case.
Is that true, Mr. Ndlovu?
No, President doesn't own Zimbabwe. He's the president of Zimbabwe. Let me remind the people that there was a constitution which was rejected by people. If the people adopted that constitution, I'm sure Mka will not be president today. But they rejected that. Secondly, the president was elected by the people, for the people. And our constitution says this is his first term of office. When he is re-elected, if ever he is re-elected come 2018, that is his last term. So, one thing, if you ubaba ukhuluma ngamapolice, usayisela the police. So kudingakala ukuthi uzwisise ukuthi wena amapholisa institution yokuprotecta i-ruling class, because omunye umuntu ngase kukhuluma ngamasela lamapholisa omunye umuntu uyasonta ngolambile ipholisa livikele lo ongcindezele lo otontayo ukwenzela ukuthi angatholi lokho okunye ipholisa institution yaleyana yefanele isidilezi ikhoti nalesikhuluma ngayo ICC nalezi ungakhangela thina bayilisecolonialism hello
yes siyakuzwa baba siyakuzwa Ndlovu
siyabona ukuthi ama-African leaders not that they are condemning njengokuthi othina bakhondona akubulawa abantu nobody condones ukubulawa kwabantu not right but thina sikhangela ukuthi ama-African leaders won't receive if they're hearing to ICC ngoba it is controlled by oppressors.
So according to Mr. Ndlovu, I think you heard him, right? He says, no one should actually condone the killing of anyone in any nation. So he says, any hearing that these African leaders can go for, there won't be any fairness, you know, because it's controlled by former colonial rulers. That's how he says it.
But Advocate Shumba, what happens now? I mean, South Africa is a signatory to this ICC, and obviously a lot was expected from them. But I mean, Mr. al-Bashir has left South Africa. What does this mean? What is going to happen next? Can the government be sued?
Well, quickly, I wanted to just revert to what another caller said about President Mugabe owning Zimbabwe. He is using that metaphorically to mean, for example, that he has been in office for a very long time. For how long does he want to be in office before he retires and he have time for his grandchildren? Does he want to rule the country until he appears like Biltong? Or does he really, what more can he offer in those years, which has never been done before? That is why he continues to go back to history instead of looking to the future. But at any rate, regarding your question, what will happen now? The judge has ordered that the South African Home Affairs Department and the other 7 respondents, which are the other government departments, are given 7 days within which to bring in an affidavit explaining which port of exit Omar al-Bashir used to evade justice in this country. Once that is done, the Southern African Litigation Center will then take a decision as to what they want to do as applicants. And I suspect that they might even bring contempt of court proceedings against certain government officials, because Omar al-Bashir's jet up until last night was at OR Tambo Airport, but this morning it was at Waterkloof Air Base, from where he left. So it is very clear that some people in government facilitated his escape.
Interesting. Gibbs.
So, Mr. Ndlovu, or maybe let's go to Mr. Mkwananzi. Are you still on the line?
No.
Oh, he's cut off. Okay, let's go back to Mr. Ndlovu. Mr. Ndlovu, you know, as Mr. Shumba is putting it, it appears as if people are really not happy about leaders that stay in power for a long time. What is your view on this?
You see now, leaders don't impose themselves upon people. They are elected by people. Our constitution says political rights. Every citizen of Zimbabwe has the right to free and fair regular elections. They have the right to be elected. It doesn't give the age restriction. If they want
in 2008, Mugabe was not selected by the people.
Sorry?
In 2008, Mugabe was not selected by the people.
Well, that is your own opinion, because there were elections in 2008. So everybody is entitled to his or her own opinion. But let's say he was elected, and he remains elected until the next election. So our constitution, you see, we have to be practical. If you want certain things changed, we go back to our legislation. Change our legislation. If we change our legislation and somebody does something which is inconsistent with legislation, then we can point fingers. But where somebody is doing anything, even leadership, within the confines of the constitution, there's no point in us making noise, because that individual is elected and remains in office in terms of the country's constitution.
Mr. Shumba?
Well, I just wanted to say, following from my interjection there, that there are a host of elections that were held in Zimbabwe in much the same way as they are held in different parts of Africa. And those elections were never pronounced free and fair, not even by the African Union. That is why you find the African Union always tries to find ways of circumventing the use of the word free and fair, and they end up saying they were credible or legitimate, as in 2005. So basically what it shows is that we have presidents that actually impose themselves on the people. So let's not lie and say that these presidents are well liked. That is why they continue to remain in office. And secondly, even if you go back to the ICC, let's show the microscope to the lie that the ICC is European. It is not. Up until last year, the president of the court was from Ghana. She used to be my lecturer at the University of Lebanon in Ghana. So it is a lie.
European is not in terms of color. It's in terms of actions. You can't be black and act European. You are an European. You can't be black and act like an European. There are so many black people who act like Europeans.
If you extend that argument...
when we were fighting here, we are not fighting against color. We are fighting against the system. And some people inherited or like to inherit the European system. I've seen that there are some leaders in Africa who like to be praised by their colonial masters. This is the thing which we must discourage and which Africa must abolish. Get rid of such leaders.
Anyway, that is casting aspersions on the judges of the International Criminal Court, and again, it's not true that those that are there are kowtowing to European dictates. Most of them are actually from various regions of the world. That is why it is called the International Criminal Court. But even if you come back to the African Union, if your argument is that they get most of their funding from European countries, you can extend that argument to the African Union and then say the African Union is not actually African because it only pays 32 or so percent of its budget. The rest comes from Europe.
So if African countries, like they are signatories to that international treaty or convention on ICC, then it's very unfortunate because it's when they perhaps put. But unfortunately, South Africa, I'm told, to sign that treaty. If they signed, they're bound by the but it's Zimbabweans. That's why Africans are urging all African countries not to be part and parcel of that thing because it's not reflective of what we call true.
But why now? Were you drunk when you signed and ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court? What has changed? The fact that you are referring your own self to the International Criminal Court. You are the worst perpetrators of human rights abuses. That is why you feature prominently there.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll come back to you. We just want to quickly take a caller here. Mkoma Alfred Magadi. Mkoma Alfred.
Hello.
Magadi yenyu.
Inosimba Magadi uzenyu.
Aiwa tiripoti peo pfungwa dzenyu nemusangano weAfrican Union.
Musangano weAfrican Union yamusangano yongonodyawo mari vachingoitawo zvisina basa tasai zvino nhasi unovarega Bashir wakaenda taitomboti kuda pamwe kuno kuSouth Africa kwachona ndo kune democracy but tinotoutaza kuti rule flow yacho no haiko vangomurega kaita hazvibatsiri zvavanoita nemuAfrica maleaders emuno they are corrupt.
Saka muri kuti musangano yekupedzerawo kopadewe retsindi.
Ya tingotandiroudzawo mari dzenyikawo vachingodzawo mari vakangodaro vanhu munyika dzedu vanhu vekuno muAfrica tichitambura hapana zviripo musangano yavanongoita just a talk shop no action.
Aiwa tinotenda zvikuru Mkoma Alfred nekupinda muchirongwa chedu.
Ya tinotenda murambi muchingotibatawo chipewo pfungwa dzedu.
Aiwa hapana chakaipa tinokufonirai zvedu.
Notenda.
Of course Alfred there is saying these are useless meetings, nothing comes out of them. They are just the leaders who just go there, talk and talk, no action.
Yes, wewe baba Ndlovu uyazwela lapha uyakhuluma baba ofonileyo uthi ke imhlangano enje vele AU ukuhamba nje ukuthi abantu betshone bekhweba itiye kungalo into eziyaphuma khonapho kambe ungathini ngakhonoko.
Ngakhuluma lokho ngifisa ukufundisa iningi la.
Kade lokana
ya intama court ngikho ngoma court.
Khuluma baba.
Ukuthi mina I will not blame them. Because I'm a court, they are nearly interpreting legislation. Because I'm sure if legislation in international law is, I think, consistent with South African law. That's why they are interpreting in that way. If it's not that law, then are getting consistent, they will not have interpreted the way they interpreted. Because I'm sure that law, I would say, was adopted by the South African Parliament, South African Parliament. So I'm not blaming my law court. But with regards to my leaders, I don't believe it. Well, you see, that's why I'm sitting at the Parliament of the Parliament. Abahamba kukhona umnyungu abundomnyungu bakhona futhi ama-Americans ahamba ayayisala khona phana engazi they don't see what is happening but bakhona abanye. That's why we are trying to build Africa. But with this kind of resistance, it's like we still have a long way to go as Africa.
Kodwa kumele kwenziweni phela ukuthi kuphume into eyakhanya phela baba Ndlovu icace sibuthi lapha kuphume lokho kungaphumani khonapha ngombono wakho.
It's problem in Africa. You could see even leadership in the plan one group abanye bahamba responsive ngamanye that's the problem nekhona ngo idea was to come with the United States of Africa like the one everything ama boundaries and what point look wonke ama restrictions akhona movement in the trade Africa but I know it's not going to be possible. Yes, the mom I must agree to that. It's not simple.
Kwenziwa kwini khona?
Siko amanye amazwe ngathi majority yama African countries they are neo-colonialists. They are still under the reign of their former colonial masters. They go there to say what they've been protected or directed to say. That's why it's not a fair vote when they think that this is going to anger their former colonizers. They will not even vote them. They'll just run away or keep quiet. They will not speak out. They go and apologize after that. But once you see people going out to apologize, then you need to deliver the problem.
Ndlovu baba siyabonga kakhulu bambe khonapho. So what Mr. Ndlovu is saying is that at the end of the day there was this kind of concept of the United States of Africa, but it doesn't believe that Africa will ever go there, because he says some nations are still under colonialism in a way. There's this what is called neo-colonialism, where their kind of ideas are still under some kind of cloudiness, through their former masters. So he says that cannot happen anytime soon. So he really pities Africans for that.
Advocate Shumba, is Zimbabwe really free like Mr. Ndlovu is portraying here?
No, Zimbabwe is not free. It is still under colonialism. This is why we want to start teaching Chinese in our universities, to force our students to study Chinese. This is why most of our minerals are now being mortgaged to China. That is the reason why you find we are now busy flying all over to the east these days. So we are still not free. But what is worse is that we are not free from ourselves. The dictatorship that we have in the country, which started a long time back until people started opening their eyes. But I think he will, even Mrs. Zhou, will agree with me that there are a lot of things that are terribly wrong in the governance structure of our country. That is why you find people like Maimu Juru and others are now realizing belatedly that they have been wrong altogether. So I think you can't really say that we are free, least of all from our own leaders inside the country. That is why also many of us are here suffering the brand of xenophobia in these countries. That is why you are broadcasting from the United States of America. But I also wanted to conclude perhaps quickly by saying that I agree with the caller who says the AU is another talk show, which is just very, very taxing on the taxpayers in Africa. They have been talking of these same things a long time back. Women empowerment has been talked about a long time back, but they misconstrue gender equality, gender empowerment with elevating their girlfriends to positions of power in parliament or elsewhere. They misconstrue gender empowerment with elevating their women relatives. So, even their wives into positions of authority, not only in government but in their political parties. We have been talking about unity of the African people and countries. That is enshrined in the African Charter. We've been talking about it since the formation of the OAU. We are still talking about that. But on the ground, what we are seeing is disunity. We don't even have a common market. We don't even have to date a common passport. Those are the values that we're speaking to. Our forefathers were speaking about, Kaunda and Nigerere and many others who first formulated these ideas, even Kwame Nkrumah.
Very interesting indeed. Yes, we Baba Ndlovu. Xa usukhangeleke ngama-ideals abantu abayibo abasungula i-Afrika, kambe kuyiwa ngaphi nxa ucabanga la ngomhlangano lo owenzekalayo? Kuya ngaphi phambili kunjani khonapho?
No, then that is it. It's very unfortunate ukuthi amazwe amaningi ama-founding fathers abasalandeli indlu ngayifake ama-founding fathers galisa lokugalisa kade sebephumile abanye because the unfortunate part ukuthi amazwe e-Africa although belama-resources they are very poor and it's very impossible ukuthi umuntu poor aqalise kunika ama-instructions kumbe adlulele umuntu ozomnika umthrisa amnika ama-resources. The unfortunate part yena lokuthi i-Africa ilama-resources but ayenelisi ukuthi ama-resources lawo asebenze ebantwini ba-Africa. I-expectation that isiba khona politically they are all free but economically we still have a long way to go as Africans. Ngoba ama-means of production, we don't control them. That's the unfortunate part.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ndlovu. So I think you heard him very clearly. He says Africa is crippled by poverty, and it has got a lot of resources. But, distributing those resources is a very big challenge. So he says, because of that reason, African economies are in dire straits. So that's a big challenge, according to him. So maybe, Mr. Shumba, you can weigh in there, just briefly. We'll give you 1 minute. Yeah,
I agree with Mr. Ndlovu there. We have poverty in terms of ideas, rather than, I would say we have poverty in terms of ideas rather than resources and how to use them. In Zimbabwe, for example, we had the best in the world deposit of alluvial diamonds. As evident by statements from our officials and from the former finance minister Tendai. But what has happened to those diamonds? They are going to China. They are going into some little pockets of certificates inside government. So they can't pay civil servants because we are corrupt. So part of the problem is our bad governance on the continent. And secondly, we are also poor because we do not have proper institutions of accountability. That is where we have it wrong. We are also poor because we prioritize things wrongly. The first bad priority to emanate from the African Union Summit currently going on is the attempt to make the International Criminal Court an issue. President Mugabe, before he came here, was trying to persuade Malawi that they should pull out of the International Criminal Court. What has that got to do with bad roads inside Zimbabwe?
Thank you, Mr. Shumba. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Shumba.
Regatore mtereri kupedzisira mukoma obey makadi. Awa tiripo taurisai mukoma obey muri kuti kudini musangano weAfrican Union Summit.
Musangano chete hapana chinobuda ipapo chatingati chipenyu chingatipa kuti tingafara kuti
sei muri kuti hapana chinobuda?
Chinoitika ipapa ndechoti vanhu ivava pavanoungana havana kusimbisana kwavanoita, vanongosvika vachitaura nyaya dzavo sevanhu vari pandare. Uya nenyaya yake ongotaura kuti vazoteera kuti zviya zvatakataura kwakati zvaitwa here, hapana zvakadaro.
Asika mukoma upe vanongoti katoti kufamba bichala kazvibva zvanzi musi mumwe chete zvobva zvaitaka.
Hapana kuti vanhu vangatopedza mari rezi vachitaura zvinhu zvine 15 years kumberi, hazvina zvazvinotipa kaizvozvo.
Saka hapana chakanaka chinoitika.
Hapana chakanaka chinokuda ipapo.
Aiwa, tinotenda zvikuru mukoma obey. Of course, obey, like most of our callers, is saying this is an exercise in futility. Leaders will just go there and talk as if they are, the pub talk. This one is talking about dynamos, this one Highlanders, this one is talking about the economy,
and by elections,
exactly. Nothing comes out of it.
At least they don't fight.
Unfortunately, we have to end it on that note. So we want to take this opportunity to thank you, Mr. David Ndlovu, ZANU-PF Central Committee member, Advocate Gabriel Shumba in Pretoria, South Africa, and Mr. George Mkwananza. Unfortunately, we had problems with his phone. Of course, we want to thank our callers, our listeners, our viewers, and those who sent messages on Facebook and WhatsApp. Signing off, this is yours truly, Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Gibbs Dube saying good night, Zimbabwe.